right. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants event. My name is Joe Grabowski, and I'll be your host for today. We got started a little slower today because our previous event, we were live with Darwin 200 on Rapa Nui, or Easter Island, as it may be known to some of you out there. And we were out broadcasting live from the island. It was absolutely incredible. It was hard to tear ourselves away. So we eventually had to call an end to the broadcast so we could continue with our World Ocean Week action. If you've been joining us this week, you know it has been nonstop. I think by the end of the week, we'll have 16 live events connecting with researchers, scientists, explorers who are exploring our ocean and bringing all kinds of exciting discoveries and research to us live from the field, live from the front lines of what's happening all over our blue planet. So we still have a whole bunch of events today. All day long, I'll be broadcasting here from the Explorers Club in New York. I'm in the 5th floor in the map room, so you might hear a little echo because the ceiling is really high here. Some of the speakers will join me right here in the map room. Others will join me virtually, and we're going to share some of their stories all day long today. So let us introduce our speaker joining us now. We've got Dr. Beverly Goodman joining us. She is exploring the world of single-celled shell-building Foraminifera. Sorry, that was so great. She'll do it much better for us. They've been around our planet for 500 million years and can tell us lots of things about the past climate of our planet. So Beverly blends archaeology, geology, and anthropology to explore the complex ways natures and humans interact on coastlines. So her work concentrates on the causes and effects of ancient environmental events like tsunamis and floods to better attempt to understand what was going on in the past. And so she is a 2009 National Geographic Emerging Explorer. She just got in, I think, yesterday from Israel. Very cool. So we're going to bring you in live with us. Here we go. We might have a little mic feedback, so I might mute your mic really quickly, but let's see how it does. There we go. All right. I'm going to pass you my mic so you're a little clearer here.
Thank you.
Perfect. Beverly, it's so great to have you with us. Yeah, I think this might be your first Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants event.
I think it is. I'm very excited.
All right, excellent. I am going to tuck myself away. We're going to let you, oops, I put me full screen. There we go.
Groups that once you hear about them, once you know about them, you think to yourself, oh my gosh, how have I never heard of these things before? Because lots of people haven't heard of them, but they're super common and they've been researched for many, many years. You know, they're as old as coral. They are all over the world, and they're actually something that you can pretty easily, if you go to the sea or if you're on a beach, you can grab a handful of sand and go home and wash it up a bit, and you can probably find some of them yourself. So that's what makes them super exciting. And of course, all the things that we can learn from them. So I guess I'm going to start by saying a little bit about what it's like to work underwater. I know that this week we're in Oceans Week, so I'm surrounded with people who are doing amazing things with turtles and dolphins and whales and coral reefs. And a lot of times when we think about the ocean and we think about research, we think about these kind of big animals, you know, these what we like to call charismatic species, these kind of animals that, you know, grab our attention, and either because of their size or, you know, just because they're so interesting or attractive and all those things like octopi and those kind of things. But there's, you know, the number of animals in the ocean obviously is just incredible. We don't even really know. And a lot of them live in the water or on the sea bottom as well. So I'm looking at things that mostly you can't see without some kind of help. Okay, so these organisms, like here we have in this picture this octopus, but as I'm looking at the octopus, between me and the octopus all over these rocks are all kinds of animals, and included in there are these little tiny single cell organisms that I'm going to talk about. So when you go out there, this happens to be my son helping me out on some of the research, we think about the columns and archaeology and that interesting stuff, but we can actually learn a lot just about the sand that's around those objects, because inside that sand, we have these little animals. And these little animals, some of them are super picky, okay? They don't want to live anywhere and everywhere. They want to live in specific places and specific temperatures and specific, they want a certain saltiness, a certain salinity to the water. And so by looking at them, we can answer questions. What was it like when this column fell into the water? What was the climate like? What was the water temperature? How deep was it? Maybe it's changed. Maybe the sea level was something else. So sometimes when we're working, we're diving around. Sometimes we're deep in the mud. Here I am collecting some samples to look at, because foraminifera are all over the world, and they're also in all kinds of different environments. So you can find them in the deepest parts of the ocean, and you can also find them in muddy mangroves. This is a picture where we're taking samples from probably about shoulder deep in Mexico. And other times we will take, this is a little video of how we will take samples. For example, you've ever heard of a biopsy, like in medicine, where they go and they take a little sample maybe and they poke into something to get a sample. Well, we're kind of doing the same thing. If we're working in the deep, deep ocean, we might use something from a big research ship. And sometimes if we're working shallow enough, we'll collect it like this. You're just like banging a fence post into the ground, and then we pull it out. And what we can see is inside that tube, once we get everything out, it's like reading a book. It's like tree rings. We can actually go through it and say, okay, has the sea bottom changed, over the time that all of this material settled? So that's why these little animals are so useful. Other times we might collect kind of like a marine biologist might, where we have sort of survey equipment, and we've got a spoon and we've got a cup, and we just go ahead and take it from the surface. Like this is a study that was done to try to see how these little foraminifera cope with pollution, things like microplastics that get into the sea. And so we were collecting in an area that has a lot of human activity and a lot of tourism. And sometimes, unfortunately, plastic enters into the ocean. And so we're trying to see how much, and how might that change what these little things. So you're probably dying to know what these things look like already, right? I keep talking about them like you have something in your head, and oh wait, but first we got to talk about some of the visitors we get in these places when we're working. Sometimes they're not very happy about us coming and taking some of their sand away. So we have to be a little careful. This is a lionfish, which those of you have probably heard of them because it's a big concern in places like the Caribbean, because they're not endemic there. They're not native species, they're invaders. But this is actually an image from a place in the Red Sea where this is their natural home. So once we've collected, and again, from all kinds of different places, we bring it back to the lab and we look at it underneath a microscope. And what would look just like, not boring, but sand, everyday things, suddenly we start to see these little objects inside. Sometimes it's mineralogical, sometimes, and then as you can see, we also have these tiny, itsy bitsy size of a grain, but they're starting to look like some kind of seashell. Whoa, here we go. So what you're looking at in this image, these are all about the size of a grain of sand. Okay, the little bar that you see next to it is the size of 100 microns. Okay, so what is 100 microns? We're looking at, tenth of a millimeter, I guess. Okay, so this is a these are very, very small. And if you look at them without help, you're just going to see kind of either a round, flat little thing that looks a little bit like a shell of some sort, but you're not going to see all these details. So if you can possibly imagine these very ornate things, they're teeny, teeny, tiny. They're the size of a grain of sand, and it's a single cell organism. They're building all of this. This is their skeleton. Okay, this is what they're creating just from one cell. Okay, that's kind of, sometimes it's mind-boggling for me to think how complicated of a house they can build basically with just this one cell. Yeah, we have a lot more, and I don't think I have any of these pretty, quite as interesting, ornate things created with every single cell. And we can look at them and we can analyze them in different types of analysis. We can look at their geochemistry. So we can, we like to say you are what you eat. So if we come and if we check you, we might be able to tell if you're more of a meat eater, or if you're more of a vegetarian. You can actually tell that from your own body chemistry. And the foraminifera are the same. So we can actually recognize from these skeletons what kind of temperature they lived in, what kind of salinity. And by doing that, we can learn more about the past for the past 500 million years. So it's very convenient, just like coral. Here's some beautiful drawings I just wanted to share, because it's important to know that they've been a big part of oceanography. They were, in the 19th century, there was the Challenger expeditions that went all over the world. One of the first, basically one of the most important modern oceanographic expeditions. And part of it was the description of foraminifera. So the one you see on the left here is a beautiful drawing from those, we call ourselves micropaleontologists, where they were collecting from the ship, and then they would actually draw. If you can imagine, these were hand drawn, because they couldn't just take a quick microscopic photograph. So they would actually draw these things in great detail. And here's an example from a modern photograph. Okay, so they didn't do too bad, and you can see how complex they can be. This is a single cell. And as we go in, we can see all these intricate details. And interestingly enough, sometimes inside these little tiny critters, we find even smaller critters. It's just this kind of endless world of going in and in, deeper and deeper. So that's what I wanted to share with you about what I do, and I guess I don't need to share the whole screen now, about what foraminifera are and how we use them. And I'm here to answer questions, I guess.
All right, excellent. I'm going to keep you nice and front and center because we're going to play a little Kahoot quickly. So while you were doing a little bit of presentation, I pulled together a couple questions quickly here. So let's get it loaded up onto the screen. And let's play a little bit of Kahoot. All right. So you're going to have to go to kahoot.it. You're going to want to go to kahoot.it. It's going to ask you for a PIN number. That now. Your PIN number for today is 9964365. If you're at your seat, you could join with a Chromebook maybe, or a tablet. If you don't have something at your seat, your teacher could pop it up at the front of the classroom. You could shout out your answers to him or her, or you don't have to join with technology at all. You can still take part, you can still answer the questions and see how you do at the end. The quicker you put in those right answers, the more points you're gonna get. Yeah, and then we'll spend a little time doing a little Q&A action with Beverly. So Beverly, maybe just while we're waiting for a few students to join us here in the Kahoot, can you maybe, like you said, there's so many things in the ocean, and we usually pay attention to turtles and penguins and sharks and big things like that. What drew you to the small?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I think the fact that once you look under a microscope and you see them, you kind of feel like you've gotten this secret password into this universe that is right in front of you, yet you just need this little extra help in order to see it. So for me, I think I just find it so fascinating that it's like this micro world within our planet that says so much about the big picture.
Yeah.
Things that we do, if let's say we build a harbor. I'll give you an example. So some of the work that we do is on ancient harbors. We can actually see the change in the community of Foraminifera when a harbor is built.
Yeah.
And that to me is just fascinating to think how, it really shows like how the things that we do affect our planet and how, it's also integrated. So for me, it's just, it also allows me to work anywhere in the world. If you work on penguins, you can really only go to certain places, right? And if you work on something that is global like this, it means that pretty much any coastline, any ocean system is going to have something of interest for me.
All right. Well, let's get to some Kahoot action here. I am going to make sure I pick the right screen. I'm going to hit start, and we'll see who comes out on top in our Kahoot today. We're going to count you in with 3 seconds, and we are going. So true or false, Foraminifera, I think I did a little better that
Good
time,
job.
are limited in where you can find them in the ocean. Is that true? Or is that false? Are they limited? Are they just in certain ecosystems? Are they just small areas near the coast? Is it true? Are they limited to where we find them in the ocean? Is that true or false? All right, that is false. Beverly, you mentioned they're all over the place, which you just said takes you to places all over the world, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, it is true. There are some places they have a hard time living. In fact, and that's interesting too. Sometimes if they don't have the right nutrients or something, but generally what's nice is you do find them pretty much everywhere in the world. Any sand you pick up, you'll find them.
All right, that puts the giving cheetah in first place. We've got another true and false coming your way. They are single-celled organisms. Is that true or is that false? If I look at that picture, my first instinct might be to say, no way, that must be false, but let's see what our students think. True or false, single-celled organisms? A few more seconds there to lock it in. All right, didn't fool anyone on that one. That is absolutely true. There we go. Giving cheetah is not going to let go. We've got one more question here before we'll shift to some Q&A action. So which is not a thing we can tell from their shells? So Beverly mentioned 3 things. Was the odd one out here? Is it how often they moved, temperature they live in, what they eat, or salinity? So we have 4 options there. Which one was not mentioned today? How often they move, temperature, maybe what they were consuming, and salinity in the water. 5 more seconds. All right, so how often they move was not mentioned. I should just double check and confirm. We can't tell that from looking at that, or maybe we can.
Actually, the newer technology that we have now, I would have said no, maybe 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But now that we have, of the small things, we have more and more finer and finer resolution. Sure. Let's say we had a forum that for some reason got shifted to a new environment. Maybe we could see a change in their geochemistry in the new chambers. Maybe.
Right.
So that might not be true anymore, but I did not mention that. This is true.
Very cool. Well, that's just the thing is, I think students sometimes hear there's nothing left to explore or discover. But in truth, we're just scratching the surface of our planet and beyond as well. So
yeah, absolutely.
All right, let's take a look at our podium. In third place, we've got the Radiant Bunny. In second place, the Knowing Badger. And in that top spot, we've got the Giving Cheetah, held on all the way through. Very cool. I'm going to come back from that screen share. I'm going to turn off our Kahoot music because we don't need it anymore. And we're going to switch gears to a little Q&A action. So I'm going to start off with one here, Beverly, right from YouTube. And we saw that you were putting the tube to get that core. So how deep do you take those samples?
Okay, so there is research where they are taking cores that are, no exaggeration, like a mile long. Okay, like that, and Foraminifera are part, or microfossils in general, are a part of ways that we understand like the long geology. For my work, I'm mostly looking at more recent when I say recent, I'm speaking like a geologist. So when I say more recent, I'm usually talking about, say, 20,000 years. But the longest cores that I usually deal with, that I take by hand, might be about 20 feet long. And that's really long. A lot of them are even just 6 feet long, 7 feet long, even 3 feet long will give us a lot of information.
All right. Well, we've got Mr. Hancock's crew hanging out backstage. They are joining us from Canada. Let me bring Mr. Hancock in. How you doing, Mr. Hancock?
Well, we're doing great here. We're a bunch of giving cheetahs in this room, so we're pretty proud of our knowledge.
Oh, the giving cheetah. Good.
We were wondering, is there anything out of the ordinary you've discovered or seen when you were exploring down there with you or your son? Anything you thought shouldn't be there?
Yeah. So when you're out and exploring, have you ever encountered anything that you thought was out of the ordinary or shouldn't have been where you were?
Definitely. In fact, when that happens, that's always, on the one hand, you plan your research and you say, okay, this is what we expect, and these are the questions that we're asking, and when we go, we're going to see this, and we're going to be able to do this, and then you get there, and it doesn't fit what you expect. And in my experience, that actually ends up being sometimes the best research, because you don't know what you don't know. So when you go to something like that, it ends up opening up a new door. So of course now I'm sure you're wondering an example. So I have to think quick here on my toes. Oh, I know one. So one of the times when we were doing an underwater excavation for an archaeological site, and we were able to find, I mentioned those harbor muds earlier, and how the environmental, how we could see from the Foraminifera that there was this change in the community. But the thing that was so strange was that we thought, okay, we're gonna have this harbor floor, and it's gonna be everywhere where the harbor floor was, right? That makes sense. But the strange thing is we would find like patches missing, like just little craters, like gone here, gone there, gone there, which we didn't really know why that would be. And there were some theories, like maybe anchors, had like pulled up the muds and disturbed them, or who knows what. And many years later, after doing more research, we understood that those patches, those missing pieces, were actually caused by tsunamis that happened later. That this is something that happens when tsunamis occur, that it will actually erode out the mud, but the mud doesn't like come out in a clean, it doesn't come out like nice and slowly. It'll actually come out in patches, what we call rip clasts. And these rip clasts will leave sort of these missing, almost picture like a carpet that just has some pieces torn out of it all over the place. So yeah, that was an unexpected thing that we encountered, and it ended up being something really important.
All right, we'll see if you have another one on deck, Mr. Hancock, and then
we'll go back to YouTube. Yeah, absolutely. One of our students was wondering, do you ever get scared or worried when you're down there diving so deep?
Do you ever get nervous or scared when you're diving and doing the work?
So there have been moments, I think that once, the truth is there aren't very many really scary things in the ocean. It's so interesting, and the amount of times that you encounter something that might make you nervous or afraid, usually you're just so excited to see it because it's so rare that the excitement kind of overwhelms any sense of, fear. We did have an encounter once with a very, 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 very large tiger shark. And I had never seen a tiger shark in this place. And we were working in deeper than we normally worked. It was about, I guess, around over 100 feet. It was like 130 feet, something like that. Quite a deep dive, something we'd planned for months. We were using equipment that, we could be down there for a very long time. And it was, we'd spent so much time that as a scientist, when something like that happens, the funny thing is you can be so project driven that while it was a little scary and definitely exciting, as a scientist, it was like, oh, don't ruin this. Really, we've got work to do. What are you doing? Do I have a minute to tell a funny story about that? Okay, all right. So, and actually, this is one of the funnier moments in my research history. So I was with a dive buddy. We never work by ourselves underwater, both because there's a lot of work to do and also for safety. And so my colleague, his name is Timur. So Timur and I are working, and we have this big cage with us. And the cage has nothing to do with the shark. The cage has to do with, literally, it's our toolbox, because we're working so deep that, we don't want to have to like go get the wrench. So sometimes we want to bring extra equipment. So we bring down literally a tool closet with us down to where we're collecting the cores. So we'd put the core in and everything was good. And then we're going on to the next step for the removal. And I see behind him what I swear looked like a minibus. It just looked like almost like a cardboard cutoff floating behind him. And I went, oh my gosh, that is humongous. And what is it? And it was close enough that I understood that it was a tiger shark. And of course, I just tried to stay calm because it was exciting, but also a little scary because it truly was humongous. I mean, later we found out that it was over 4 meters. It was a very big one. But I thought I should let my buddy know that there is this minibus shark behind him. And so I gave him the shark sign. And so this is the shark sign. You put your hand on your head, get in the picture here. That's the sign for shark. But I was trying to be really cool because, I wanted to be calm and, collected. Sure. So I sort of did it very casually, like, pointed and gave a little shark sign, and he looked at me and like, what are you talking about? And I did it again, and I'm watching the shark kind of going off into the blue. And at some point I thought, okay, so he doesn't know, he didn't see it, but here we are, and let's get out of here. Let's finish our work. So we finished our work, and we get out on the ship, and we finally get up, which it's a very deep dive. So our decompression time, and we're diving with rebreathers. I mean, it's a good hour and a half later by the time, and part of the dive we have to wait at these stations in order to decompress, for safety. And the whole time I'm sitting there, I'm feeling like a worm at the end of a fish hook, just keeping an eye around, to see whether or not the shark is coming back. In any case, we get off the ship, and I tell him, I said, and I explained to him, and he looked at me, he goes, oh my gosh, I was trying to figure out the entire dive why you were giving me the sign of the rooster.
You're too casual.
I was too casual, and I had a hood on that had a red stripe. So I was going like this. And he was picturing this, this rooster.
Very different thoughts on the anchor line. You're worried about sharks, and he's in the barnyard.
Going, why is she joking around about roosters while we're doing this? So to this day we talk about the Red Sea rooster. They got to watch out for the Red Sea rooster. So.
Right. Very cool.
Absolutely. There's no time for jokes while you're diving, right? What's the rooster all about? That's great. We had a couple of students wondering if you hallucinate sharks. And what is your oldest discovery, and how do you figure out how old these things actually are?
What's the oldest what?
So what were maybe one of the oldest samples you collected, and how do you actually know they're that old?
Okay. So I did tell a little lie earlier when I said I only work on things that are about 20,000 years old. That was a small lie, a small white lie. We do have a project where we worked on samples that came from Texas, and those samples were actually 82 million years old. And so in those samples, we use a lot of different methods for figuring out the age of the samples. Sometimes we have fossils in addition to our microfossils that are specific to a certain time period. So imagine like a certain dinosaur that only lived during a certain time. And so if in that same layer we see that fossil, this is a marker that gives us an age range. So that's one way. If we're working on things that are more recent, we will use what's called radiocarbon dating. So we can actually, if it's preserved well enough, we can get a date from the shell of the foram itself. And we also have a few other methods that aren't as widely known. Like there's something called optically stimulated luminescence dating, which actually dates the exposure time, or when the sand was last exposed to sunlight, like when it was buried. So we pretty much will grab any dating method that we have access to that makes sense for what we're doing. And one of the newest methods that we're messing around with right now, sadly, is because we're doing this microplastics work. Microplastics are introduced 100 years ago max. Okay, mostly it's from the 1950s. And so we can actually use the presence of microplastics is now becoming sort of a dating mechanism. Wow. Or another interesting modern thing, interesting being code for, unfortunate but scientifically useful at times. Let's say we have an invasive species. So the Mediterranean and the Red Sea were connected by the Suez Canal. And after those two seas were connected, certain organisms from the Red Sea are now living in the Mediterranean, but they weren't before the Suez Canal. So if I find those Foraminifera that I know made their way to the Mediterranean after the arrival of the Suez Canal, I can actually use that as a dating tool.
Okay, very cool. Well, shout out to Mr. Hancock's class. Those are some great questions. They're just slipping out for recess now, but you guys had some awesome questions, so thank you for those questions. We've got several classrooms hanging out on YouTube, so don't be shy. Use the chat. I've got a few more questions here in the chat, so let's dive into one of them. The samples, are they hard to preserve?
Oh, so mostly no, and that's one of the things that makes them really convenient. When we're working with samples that aren't living, okay, so we're not trying to preserve the living tissue on them. We're really interested just in the skeletons anyway. And most of them aren't, if we're not, mostly I'm working with things that aren't alive. The lifespan might be at the most 2 years. Many of them are just weeks, months, half a year. So they preserve, in most environments, they preserve really, really well.
Yep.
So that means it's great for collection, and it's also great for preservation in the laboratory. So they can be preserved for a very long time. There are certain types that are less, and it also depends on what environment. Of course, if it's a more acidic environment, then it's going to dissolve, calcium carbonate. So in those conditions, we won't get good preservation. But if it's, a lot of the time we get very, very good preservation.
All right. I've got a couple classes from a Toronto class here, a couple questions from a Toronto class here, and they want to know, have you ever discovered any new species?
So we are working on, one of the projects that we're working on with National Geographic is we get samples from a larger project called Pristine Seas. And they send us samples from all over the world. And some of these samples are coming from places that either were only slightly studied as far as which foraminifera, or they've never been studied for the foraminifera. So in the case of those, we are definitely finding types that have not been recognized before, that we're seeing, we're able to identify a few new species. Sometimes we're not sure. It can be a little bit hard with foraminifera because, you saw how complex their shells are. And to make it even more complicated, sometimes they'll have environmental differences. So you have the same species, but suddenly it's rounder, or it's flatter, or it's doing something slightly different.
Yeah.
And if we're only dealing with the shell, we sometimes don't know that it's actually the same. It's an environmental effect and not actually a new species. So we think we have, but sometimes we know that it could be a type that's a difference from environmental exposure, rather than an actual different species by definition.
Okay, very cool. Well, they have a follow-up. So you do lots of diving, and not just for our single-celled friends. So they're wondering the most interesting or strangest thing you've encountered on a dive.
Oh, there's so many things. Personally, the thing that I always get very excited about is when we find an archaeological artifact that's very personal. That to me is always really exciting. In one of the excavations, we found in the mud a leather sandal that was 2,000 years old. And, it just made me, it's so personal, it's someone's shoe that they lost. So to me, that gives just this real kind of a whole picture, comes in my head of what that connection to the actual person that would have worn that sandal. So that to me is always really exciting. But we've had so many different amazing experiences. Like one which actually you can go on YouTube. I can give you the link to take a look at this. We had a very lucky, our team had an incredibly lucky catch where the team had gone out to collect some samples because we were doing studies on flash floods. Okay, so in the desert, it rains, and then sometimes you get these, you have a riverbed that's a dry wadi, a dry riverbed, and then it rains and you get this incredible flood that, is doesn't happen all the time. So they had gone out in order to collect samples from the floods, to see what the flood had brought in, and they happened to catch a very, very rarely recorded. In fact, as far as we know, this was the first, at the time it was the only video of this process. And what it is it's called a hyper, if you think foraminifera is hard, it's called a hyperpycnal plume. And what it means is that normally when fresh water comes into the ocean, it is lighter, right? Because seawater is more dense. And so you get what's called like a freshwater lens, where the fresh water will kind of go on the surface of the ocean. Like you get less, lighter, the salinity is lower with the water on the top. But if it's a flash flood and it's gone through the desert and it's picked up all this stuff along the way, and it's basically like, imagine this really brown, dark, water going by, when it hits the ocean, it actually drops because it's heavier, and then it rolls on the bottom like clouds.
Oh, that's cool.
And so we just happened to get there when it was happening. And so that it was just magical, seeing this. It looks like you're above the clouds, but the clouds are on the bottom of the ocean moving.
Yeah, very cool. Foraminifera. See, I'm practicing much better.
That was
much better,
incredible.
Much better than the intro.
Perfect.
Okay, so curiosity about, so this class is interested in marine biology in your career. So you don't have to give an exact number. You don't have to give your number, but they're wondering what kind of salary could a marine biologist expect to make?
So there are jobs for micropaleontologists that are very, very lucrative, that are over, well, I think they're very lucrative, where because everyone has their own scale. There's some commercial jobs working for, say, environmental companies, working for energy companies, working for large, geological companies that help with different building projects and figuring out where's safe and where's not safe, and where you might run into an environmental issue to try to, to make good decisions for managing development.
Yep.
And those people can make anywhere from probably around $70,000 to $150,000. They can make and of course in research and in academia, you make a reasonable salary. You do have to do quite a few years of studies to get there. But the college professors, doing it within in the university setting is also another opportunity. But there are a lot of opportunities for marine sciences, and more, because now that as we know, our planet is 70% ocean. We really live in this very, very tiny part of the planet, and we need to know a lot more and to become, the awareness towards how much we depend on the ocean, how much we're going to depend on the ocean, how much we don't know about the ocean. So marine science careers are definitely a choice that I believe is going to be so much more in demand, more and more over time. Yeah. So. Yeah, right. It's definitely, I can feel comfortable saying it's a very, very good career choice, in the sense that the demand and the need for it is only growing.
Perfect. Well, I think that is the perfect spot to wrap up our event for today. I want to give a big shout out to the classrooms who joined us today. Thank you for playing Kahoot. Thank you for sending in so many great questions. I'm going to put my camera back on here for a moment. Beverly, thank you so much. It was so good to have you live with us today. And we're going to have to catch you back home sometime. And
I would love that.
And do another event live together.
Yeah, and thanks to all the students and teachers. It's wonderful. And I think I heard earlier one of the classes is from Hamilton, Ontario, and I happen to do my PhD at McMaster. So even nearby, you have universities that are doing a lot of research with foraminifera.
All right, awesome. Well, lots more ocean events to come all day today and still all day tomorrow. Have a great rest of the day, and we hope to see your crew again sometime later this week. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.